We're doing this for the Midlo Center at the University of New Orleans. Today is November 15th, 2017. Please tell me your full name and where you're from.
Peter Babin III from New Orleans, Louisiana.
So have you lived all your life in New Orleans, Peter?
Yes, I never did move out the city. Well, yeah, I never did move out the city of New Orleans. Right, I had different locations in the city, but I never did live out the city of New Orleans.
So tell us a little bit about your early life. When you were born, where were you born, and what part of the city was your family living in?
My mother and dad got married in 1934, but they couldn't afford to live together. So my mother lived with her parents, and my dad lived with his parents. And they had a house on Liberty House on Moore Street between St. Philip and Bell. A little bit short, only 3 houses. And when my mother got pregnant, my grandmother Babin, we're both Catholics. My mother's Italian side, both Catholics. When my mother got pregnant, my grandmother demanded that he go what they call those days to the church and get married in a priest's house. Okay. And so I came along in 1936. And my dad was working, my mother was working, and couldn't afford to rent a house. That's why they got married secretly living. So I stood with my grandmother Babin as a baby.
What type of work was your daddy doing back then?
Roland, the only story I know about my dad as far as going that far back is that he first went to work. His uncle, a relative of his, had some type of little plumbing shop. And he first went to work in there, I understand. And the workers there talked about wanting to form a union. And since the owner was related to my dad, they said, why don't you take it in here and go talk to him about it? So he did. And when he approached, I think it was his uncle or something, when he approached him, or cousin, he said, oh, you want a union? He said, yeah. He said, good, you're fired, okay? So he got fired. And then, I can't remember that. And it could have been before, I don't know. But anyhow, I do remember the first job he had, he delivered newspapers for the Times-Picayune. It was called electric delivery. And he had trucks, and the trucks used to go out and get the papers from the Times-Picayune right there in the square off of, what's that, Coronel Street or something, where it goes, something, Camp Street. And he would deliver them to all the stands, because they had paper stands in town, and the paper boys used to sell the papers, and he'd drop them off, and sometimes he'd take me to ride with him, okay? I was a little bitty kid. And my mother worked at Maison Blanche, okay? She worked she did typing into credit, a lot of credit in those days, you know, like layaways, but she handled that. She worked 6 days a week. My dad worked 7 days a week. And that was in the late 30s.
Were y'all still living on Moss Street at that time?
I was living with my grandmother, my grandfather, okay? My daddy had a sister, but she had no children. And I was the only child. My mother, she had a miscarriage after me, and later she developed some serious problems with her breast, and she had to have them removed as a young woman. But never, ever interfered with the relationship and love between them two, my dad and my mother, never, ever. So they couldn't have any more kids. So I wound up being the only child.
So, Peter, in the late 30s, when your daddy's working, delivering papers for the Picayune to the stands, tell me a little bit about your daddy. I mean, was he from New Orleans? Were they originally from New Orleans?
Oh yeah, they were. I really don't know what part of the city they lived in, Roland, to be honest with you. But yeah, all of them. Well, my grandfather Babin was born in Lockport. And my grandmother Babin was born in New Orleans. But during the turn of the century, when things got bad, my grandfather was born, I believe, in 1880, and my grandmother was born 1885. And during the turn of the century, my grandfather came to New Orleans. He had a brother by the name of John, and they were trappers and that kind of stuff. Okay, and when he got here, he went to work in a was a manufacturing plant for clothes, and he used to cut the patterns out with a big scissors. This is the story I'm telling. I can't witness that. And my grandmother sewed, okay? And that's how they met. And they got married, okay? And he gave my grandmother a sewing machine for wedding gift. But he was a little bitty guy. And later he went to work for the Surgeon Water Board of St. New Orleans. And he became an inspector on, when they were putting in sewer lines and water lines. He became an inspector. And that's where he worked the rest of his life. My grandfather died in my arms in October 31st, 49, when we lived on Domain Street, which, if you know Moss, you go right down, 2 blocks over is Domain Street, and you take, because the buy is there, and you take a left and you go down, it was 3100 block, and he died in my arms. He had a heart attack. I used to sleep with my grandmother. I slept with my grandmother. They only had 1 bedroom. He had his bed, and I slept with my grandmother. Well, I was 13 years old when he died. I was sleeping with my grandmother. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Peter, your daddy, did he have any brothers and sisters?
No, he had a sister, 1 sister. Okay, her name was Marion, but we all called her Nanny. And she had no kids. And she was my godmother. Okay.
And so your daddy, did he go to school in that area too? Or?
My dad went to McDonough 31, I think it was, which was right there in the 5th Ward. And then he went to Warren Easton. And he graduated from Warren Easton in 29, I believe. And my mother went to grammar school. I don't know which one. They lived further. They lived on the other side of by Claiborne Avenue, somewhere in there, I believe they lived, okay?
So when you say you were staying with your grandparents, it was your daddy's mom and dad?
Right. My mother's daddy and mother, they had, my mother had 3 brothers and a sister. So there was 5 on that side, okay?
And when you said the 5th Ward, all of these addresses, the Dumaine Street and the Moss Street, that's all in the 5th Ward,
all of
correct?
All of it.
And when you said Bayou, Bayou St. John, is that what we're talking
right
about
on it,
right there?
Right on it, okay? The Moss Street was right on by St. John, okay? That's how I learned how to swim. There was a bridge on Dumaine Avenue and Moss Street, and my grandfather Babin used to tie a rope around my stomach and have me jump in the water, and he'd walk across the bridge with me with the rope around my stomach, and he taught me how to swim, okay? Because he came from Bayou Lafourche, so I guess, and Bayou Lafourche, you know, one side they lived on the other side of the bayou, you know, so it's 2 sides of the bayou they used to live on. So that's how I learned how to swim, okay?
And when you got to school age, where did you go to school?
I went to Holy Rosary, which was right down Moss Street. The back of the school is on Moss Street. The front is the church. It's Holy Rosary Church, Our Lady of Holy Rosary. That's on Esplanade. The back is on Moss Street.
And did you go to, so what hospital were you born? You were right there in the 5th Ward. What
Right.
hospital was that?
I think the hospital in those days, Roland, was, we called it the French Hospital. I think it was located on Orleans Avenue right before, I guess right before Claiborne. Okay, but I wasn't born there. I was born in Two Row. two-row. Roland, we had no money, okay? I mean, when I say no money, we had no money. And my grandfather, there was a plan that you paid $2 a month for, I think, or something like that, okay? And two-row offered that plan. And so my grandfather used to give my mother $2 a month. And that's where I was born at, two-row, okay? And there's an interesting story if you want to hear about that.
Sure.
The day, this interesting story told me, obviously, the day that they brought the baby to my mother, the rabbi happened to be passing. And he stopped and he saw having a new baby and he said, "Oh, hi, got a new baby?" She said, "Yeah." And he asked my mother, "You're Jewish?" And she said, "No, I'm Catholic." She said, "I just got this baby boy." He says, "Well, would you like to have your son circumcised?" My mother said, "Sure, I'd love to have that, but we couldn't afford it." He said, "Don't worry, I'll circumcise you for nothing." So the aftermath of this story, I've been looking for that rabbi for the rest of my life. I haven't found him. Okay.
So your mama brought you home, and your mama's name was?
Rosalie Spazzali, a maiden name, and then naturally Rose. They changed it. She was christened Rosalie, but they changed it to Rose Spazzali. Or Spizel Spazzali, how you want to say it.
And she, your daddy, and you and your grandparents were all living within a block of each other, more or less, for a couple of years.
Roland, I got to be honest. I can't remember where my dad and mother lived when I was first born. Okay, I don't remember where they lived. They lived somewhere. They lived around the neighborhood for sure, but where I don't know. Okay.
So when you stayed at Holy Rosary the whole time for elementary school?
Graduated from Holy Rosary, and from there I went to St. Aloysius High School.
And was your daddy still with the Picky unit at that
Oh,
time?
no. What happened there was I guess it was, I'm guessing now, I guess it was in like 1940 or something like that. And that was prelude to the war, you know. That's when things were heating up with Germany and England and all that kind of stuff. And they started building merchant marine ships at the Delta Shipyard, which is on the Industrial Canal on Chef Highway, which is US 11, I believe. And he got a job in the shipyard. And he got a job, and I think he got a job doing some mechanical work or something. And that's when he joined the Operating Engineers Union. December 7th, 41, he got initiated there at Pearl Harbor. The operators used to meet on a Sunday because most of them worked 6 days a week. So the union meeting was on a Sunday. And he got initiated into the Operating Engineers on December 7th, 41. A long time ago. I remember when that happened. I was living with my grandmother. Oh, well, I lived with her, okay? And we used to go to Mass in the morning. And we'd walk to church, and she would take me to Mass. And we came back from church, and there was a program that radio, no TV, radio. And it was called the Ave Maria Hour. And it was a Catholic broadcast talking about saints and that kind of stuff. And they broke in when the Japanese invaded Pearl Harbor, and it came on, and it was a flash, and that's when President Roosevelt announced that we've been bombed at Pearl Harbor, attacked it at Pearl Harbor, and that he was before Congress declaring war on Japan. And I'll never forget, he said, "And this day will go down in infamy." And that's what broke on the television. And then after that, oh, hell broke out, okay, with everything. It used to have blackouts where the lights would go out and everything else, and so in case they practice for bombing raids from them. And they had a Japanese family that lived further down on the bayou. I'll never forget it. And they were taken away in encampment. That's when they encamped in all the, everybody who had Japanese descendants or were Japanese. And they just happened to have it. And I always asked my grandmother why they did that to those people. She said, they're Japanese, son. That's all she said, you know. So I left it that way. You didn't ask no questions when you're that age, 5, 6.
So where did you go after Holy Rosary, Pete?
From Holy Rosary, I went to LSU. Yes. Oh, excuse me, St. Aloysius. St. Aloysius. Then from St. Aloysius, I graduated 55, and I went to LSU. I wanted to go to Loyola because I wanted to play ball. LSU, I mean, Loyola had a good baseball team. I wanted to play ball because that was my love. It was $450 a month, I believe, for a semester. My dad couldn't afford it.
Was your dad still with the operating
Oh,
engineers?
yes, he was with the operating engineers then, yes. He couldn't afford it. So, and you know, now they got tops. In those days, they had what they call political chits. And the senators and the representatives used to get so much money in political chits. And you could get those chits from them, and then you could go and use that for tuition and board and that kind of stuff. No meals, but tuition and board. And my dad got enough chits because he was active. He was very active in politics in those days with his union. And that's how I went to LSU. I went to LSU on $10 a week.
So your daddy didn't stay as exclusively as a crane operator. He got involved in the leadership in the local.
Yes, he was after the shipyard, then they started building all the oil refineries and chemical plants along the river. And he started, it's an expression we use, he started working out the hall. That was an expression where you go to Union Hall and you get referred to a job. And then he got elected later into the administration part of Local 406. And from there, he went on to be a business agent and financial recording secretary, and it stopped there. My dad didn't like to travel too much. It was a statewide organization. Local union is statewide. And he didn't like to travel too much. And I think because of that, he never did become the business manager, which is the top job in the organization, local organization.
Now, you said the union was a statewide union.
Right.
Is that normal for locals in this area?
It's normal for the operating engineers, not for the other trade unions. But the operating engineers traditionally throughout the country chartered local unions on a statewide basis until you got in the major metropolitan areas where, not in the city, but in a branch off of the city, they would have other local unions. But I'll give you a perfect example, Minnesota, that is statewide one, okay? Mississippi, Alabama had 2. Actually, Alabama had 3. Mississippi had 1. Texas had 2. Florida had 2 or 3. But a lot of states, it was just the whole state. Connecticut, Rhode Island, the New England states and all.
So in Louisiana, it was just one local?
Just one.
And when we say operators, and I think you said union of operators, what's the proper name for the union?
They have 2 divisions in the International Union of Operating Engineers. One division is known as hoisting and portable, and that's the construction side of it, where you see the cranes and the bulldozers and everything else that's assimilated. Building roads, bridges, high-rise buildings, tunnels, you name it, okay? The other division is known as the stationary engineers, and those are the engineers that are in buildings that maintain the building itself, the heating, the air conditioning, and all the other. Way back there, it was boilers, okay? As a matter of fact, the initial term of the union was International Union of Oilers and Steam Engineers, because the cranes were steam driven. I worked on a job one time where I was a fireman to fire a steam crane, okay? And that was something, especially when the guy was really pushing the levers, which we call that boiler would go down, and it was cold. It was built in the Mississippi River Bridge in 1955, 56, okay?
So you said you graduated from high school in '55. Had you been involved in any of the union's activities with your daddy before then?
Oh, God, Roland. My dad used to, I guess the first encounter was when I was 48, I was 12 years old. The Seafarers Union, they used to dredge for clamshells in Lake Pontchartrain. The Seafarers Union, the Teamsters and operating engineers were organizing I'm trying to think. Anyhow, concrete facilities, okay? Like you see around, concrete plants. Well, the operating engineers was the ones who would run all the equipment in the concrete plant. The seafarers handled the boats pushing the clamshells from the lake into the industrial canal. And the Teamsters drove the cement trucks. So they had a strike against Janky concrete mix, that's who it was. They had a strike. And I believe I was living on Domain Street, which is right around from, we moved off of Moss. We went on Domain Street. It was a house, and much bigger house, one more room. And the bathroom and the tub was attached to the house. On Moss Street, the bathroom was a little side house on the side with no hot water or nothing. And my grandmother used to boil the water on a stove and pour it in the tub to scald it in the wintertime. And then you had about that much water in the tub, and she'd put the cold water and put some more hot water, and that's how you took a bath, okay? So they graduated, okay? And one of the strikers, I don't want to characterize whether he was a Teamster or a sailor, didn't show up for work for his tour. Excuse me, on the picket line. And it was the midnight shift from 12 to 6 in the morning, 8 in the morning, whatever it was. And my dad was one of the strike captains along with the other two unions. And that was his area, okay, which was close to where we lived. It was not far, Jeff Davis Parkway in that area, before the interstate came through. And he got me out of bed at midnight, okay? And he says, "Come with me, son." I said, "What's that?" He says, "I want you to walk this picket line." Now, I'm 12 years old. And I said, "Okay, all right." And he took me to the picket line. He gave me a picket. He said, "Now, you just walk up and down here, okay?" He said, "I got to go off." He said, "You walk up and down here." It was close to the house. It wasn't too far away. Maybe a mile or two or something like that. A little, maybe 2. And he says, "If anybody comes up here and gives you any crap," he says, "you hit them in the head with the picket sign, you run like hell because you know how to get home." So nobody gave me no crap, but then I'd hit them in the head with the picket sign and run home. But that was my first encounter.
So that was your first job?
That was my first encounter, okay. And then later when he got active in the, they called it the Central Trades and Labor Council in those days. It's when the FFL and the CIO merged. I guess that was in '56, I believe. And he became active in going to those meetings. He used to take me with him, okay?
So when you were in school, what type of student were you, Pete?
Well, I was an average guy. My old coach used to say, "Babin, there's nothing there's nothing you can't do that I ask you to do. There's only one thing wrong. You don't excel in anything. So that's what kind of student I was. Okay.
When you went to, when you finished at St. Aloysius, well, first of all, I get a little confused. Where was St. Aloysius? Where was the school located?
Esplanade and Rampart Street.
So when you finished at Aloysius, what were your plans? What were you going to do at that point with your life?
Well, you know, my mother and dad never went to college or anything. They were working people, both of them. And so it was kind of then, you ought to go to school, you ought to go to college, you know. So I said, okay, I'll go. I really never had any desire to be anything, but at Aloysius you could take what they call commercial courses or academic courses. And the academic course was physics and trigonometry. That wasn't it. On the commercial side, you learn how to type, did accounting, bookkeeping, geography, a little geometry, English, and that kind of stuff. And so naturally, when I went, I just said I want a business course, and that's how I enrolled at LSU. But you know, Roland, there was no days where they sat down with you and kind of give you like almost a psychological experience to see really what you were and what you wanted to do, to try to determine where you should go and what courses you should take and all that stuff. So I just took a normal business course, okay, which was accounting and English and sociology and other courses. Okay, I can't recall all of them. Economics, and that's where I met Dr. Hitt.
Dr. Hitt.
Dr. Homer Hitt, yeah, he was a sociology teacher. And I was in accounting because I took accounting, bookkeeping. They didn't call it accounting. They called it bookkeeping in high school. And in the beginning, I thought maybe since I was doing construction work and my dad was in the office then, you know, doing construction, representing construction workers, I thought maybe I would want to be an estimator or something on construction jobs, you know, bidding and that kind of stuff. That didn't last long, okay? And then that's when I really got into the studies of sociology. And I took a lot of sociology classes. And I was doing good in them. I was making A's and B's in the sociology classes. And when I found out after 2.5 years, and one semester I was playing baseball for LSU, it was a walk-on. Didn't last long. The semester, matter of fact, I left. I think the baseball season was only like 18 or 20 games or something. And I left in the springtime, late springtime from school. I resigned from school because Dr. Hitt got appointed to take over this school here, UNO. And it was called New Orleans LSU or something like that.
Maybe LSUNO?
Yeah, LSUNO. That could have been it. So when I decided to do that, I told my dad, I said, Dad, I'm up to here in accounting, okay, man, I just can't handle this no more. I said, and then, I mean, he never had no money, Roland, $10 a week going to school, you know, we got a meal ticket and we used to kid around the meal ticket. It was called, the restaurant was called Chimes, we used to kid around it, and it was a standard, one day this, next day that, next day this, next day that, you know. One day it was meatballs and macaronis, and we used to kid, don't let your meatballs spill off the table because if it hits the ground, it'll bounce up on you and catch it, you know, because it's full of bread. And so I came here to see him, okay. I had resigned from school, and I came here to see him. And I don't know, I had about 85 credits, college credits or something like that. And I said, Dr. Hitt, I said, you know, I think I really want to major in sociology. I'd like to get a degree in sociology. I'm really into it, really big time into it. I mean, I studied ECHO 1 and 2, and then I got into studies of industrial sociology and urban sociology and rural sociology. And I said, man, I really want to follow you. I want to switch. And he knew me because I took a lot of courses with him. The classes weren't that big at LSU in those days. Some of them were big, like history class, you know, you might have had 85 people in or something, but smaller classes, they weren't that big. And I said, Pete, he said, I can't help you. I said, why? He says, you're too far advanced. He said, we're just starting here. He said, you'd have to wait a couple of years before I could take you in here. So I killed that idea.
So how long had you been going to LSU at that point? You got out of high school in 55.
I went semester 55, 56, 56, 57, 57 into 58, and that's when I cut out.
So what were your plans at that point? You couldn't come to UNO.
Well, my plans were, I was telling you a story driving here. My plans were that I wanted to be a jet pilot. And they had what they called, Navy had a program. If you had 2 years of college, Hellcat program, that's what they called it. You had 2 years of college, you could sign up and join the Navy and be a jet pilot, okay? And I had a roommate friend of mine, Jay Blanchett, wanted to do the same thing. And he did too. He played football for LSU 1 year, and he wanted to do the same thing. So we both left to go do that. We had to go take a test. Jay failed the test because he had high blood pressure. I failed the test because I never could identify planes. And I told her, I'll never forget, I told the officer, I said, that's what I'm here for. I want to learn how to fly planes. He says, Pete, you got to understand, the Korean War just had gotten over with not too far before that, okay? And he said, we creaming. He said, we still got a whole bunch of Air Force pilots since the Korean War. He said, and we creaming. He says, and we want people really into it, you know, been flying or did something or had backgrounds and all that kind of stuff. I said, okay. So then I was registered for the draft, but I was exempt because college, okay? He was exempt. So when that happened, I was no longer in college. I put my application in to the Army because I took Army ROTC at LSU. I should have took the Air Force had ROTC. I don't know why the hell I didn't take it out. Anyhow, I took it. So I'm working then. I'm working at the trade because I did that during the summers while I was my senior year. I worked at the trade going to school, and then I worked at the trade doing the summers at LSU. And so I went to work at the trade. All right.
When you say the trade, you mean?
Operating engineers, the union, it's just the operating engineers union. They would call it the trade, okay? And I was on a job, and in operating engineers, the boss is called a master mechanic. In others, they call superintendents. But he's the boss of all operators on the job. And he had built was working at Shell in Norco. And it was putting in a unit where they had a lot of stainless steel. And it had cutoffs because the pipe fitters used to make up the pipe in a big yard, make up yard. And when it was too long, they'd get the pipe, but if they needed to shorten it, they would cut it off. And you had these pieces of stainless steel pipe this big. And what they used to do is make boiler pots out of it. They used to weld the bottom plate and take some stainless steel welding rods and make handles. And he made one for my dad. And my dad asked me, he said, go over by Eddie's house and pick up this pot for me. So I went over there. I still had tickets to the LSU football game, and I still had my little student badge. I could go in, okay? And so I had a date to take her to the football game, and she stood me up, okay? She canceled out on me. I had nobody to go. I knew no one in New Orleans because I was in Baton Rouge for 9 months. I just came home in the summertime and I worked, okay? And so his daughter, Marlene, which is a middle name Magdalena, which she hates, they used to call her Maggie. And I just, hey, how you doing? And fine. And then when I found out I didn't have nobody, and I was working, I said, can I take your daughter, Maggie, to the football game at LSU? He said, yeah. He said, but you got one rule. I said, what's that? He said, you got to be home for 12 o'clock. Now, Roland, no interstates in those days. So you can imagine driving, and I had a little Ford car. Imagine driving to LSU for a night game with no interstates and getting back for midnight.
Did you make it back?
I made it back. Now, she did tell me, I don't remember, but she did tell me I gave a nice, not a passionate thing, gave a nice kiss. Just kissed her, let's put it that way, and said, thank you very much, I appreciate it. And that was it. And so I was waiting for the draft notice to come, and we used to have these dances we used to go to on a Saturday and a Sunday, jam sessions they called it. And I started going to one out on, now Maggie's people were in New Orleans East. They were in I can't think of the name of the little Pines Village, okay? And you get familiar, that's where you come from, okay? And I used to see her at the dance, you know, and we used to dance and all that kind of stuff. And then I started dating her. And man, I fell in love with her, okay? And we were talking, and I said, Mag, I said, it sounds like I'm getting serious here. She says, you know, I am too. And she was 5 years younger than me. She was 17 years old, okay? So I was 22. And I said, I don't think this is a good deal. I think we ought to think about not going out no more. I said, because if I go in the Army, it's at least for 2 years. So my buddy that I went to grammar school with, he went to Warren East and I went to Aloysius. We used to go together, and I was telling the story, okay, Bobby Oxman, we used to call him Ox. I said, Ox, I think I'm falling in love, man. I said, but I'm going to get drafted, and I got to go for 2 years. It's not going to be any good. He says, Pete, he says, you went to LSU and you went to ROTC. He says, there's a program with the National Guards. If you did that, you could go into the National Guards for 6 months active duty and 4.5 years for 5 years reserve duty. And you would only be away for 6 months. I said, man, that sounds like a good deal, man. Let's go see. So he takes me to the sergeant. The National Guard was on Marsh Street, on the other side of Esplanade, down there by the cemetery, in the back of the cemetery. So I went to see him, and the sergeant said, yeah, we can do this. Well, at that time, I was living with my mother and father then, okay? I was not living with my grandfather died in '49 in my arms. My grandmother was living by herself, but she had a house right across the street from where we were living. At that time, it was on South Cedar Street. And I went up to the draft board. It was on the Canal Street at the end in the Cotton Exchange building. That's what they called it on the left-hand side. Big building on the left-hand side at the end of Canal Street. It's still there. They call it something else now. Anyhow, so I go up, and I got all the papers filled out, okay? And I go see this lady, and I introduced myself, and I said, my name is Pete Babin. I said I had made an application for the draft and all, because I told the story about school and all that. And then I told her about how I could get into the Army without going 2 years, and that I'm falling in love, and that this will seal the deal. But if I go in the Army, it's over with. And she said, what is your name? I said, Peter Babin III. She said, where you live? I said, I live at 915 North South Cedar Street. She reached down on the desk, Roland, and she picked up this envelope. And she showed it to me. She said, this is your name? Yeah. She said, well, it was mailed to 915 South South Cedar Street. Oh, I said, that's the wrong address. I live on 915 South. She said, and you told me that if you get this thing, if I let you go with this, that you fall in love, you get married instead of 2 years of a breakup? She said, yeah. She says, you know, son, I believe you. You know what she did? She took that envelope and she dropped it right in the garbage can there. She says, you're in the Army for 6 months. Boy, I could have kissed her. And that's how I met my wife. And in 1960, February 60, we got married.
And y'all are still married today?
Oh, yeah.
So, Peter, you started, so after you finished your stint with the National Guard, or while you were with the National Guard, were you back working full-time out of the Union?
Absolutely. The National Guard had a division called Combat Engineers. So it was right up my alley.
And
Cranes and dozers.
did you
and
just
everything.
stay with the Union for the rest of your career, or did you work somewhere else?
No. When I got married, I started working at various construction jobs, okay, all over. And then I was working, I guess I started having a chance to, it had to be, I'm trying to recollect, Roland, it had to be somewhere in the 60s, obviously in the 60s. And then I was active with my dad in politics. And, I'll go back into that if you want me to.
Yeah.
Because it's a story relating to you, okay? Indirectly relating to you. My dad was Secretary-Treasurer of the Central Trades and Labor Council, but later became the Greater New Orleans AFL-CIO because they merged. They merged in '56. And he was very active in the political arm of the unions, including his own. And there was a young labor lawyer by the name of Fred Casabry. And they were just getting started, getting involved in local elections and all that, because before then, it was all dominated by business and everything else. And he says, son, he says, I got this young lawyer. His name is Fred Casabry. And he says, I really like him. He says, and we're going to endorse him. He said, I'm going to support him big time. And he lived in DC Boulevard, which was outside where we were living. But so my job was he would ride in a car, and my job was to run and put stickers, what you call push cards with stickers then, into the mailboxes, okay? But you wasn't supposed to put them in the mailboxes, okay? You're supposed to put them in the door, underneath the door, and they didn't have fancy stickers like you got now, where you can handle and all that. And that was my job, okay? And the first time I got involved in politics, but my mother was the ward leader and the precinct captain for the ward leader in the 5th Ward for ladies. And my dad ran one time for office. He would have got elected. He lived, that's when he lived on South Cedar Street. And they moved because he had a little bar, and it was a one-story shotgun house. One side was the bar, and the other side was where they lived. So they moved on DeSoto Street. And when they did, he moved out of the 5th Ward to the 6th Ward. And he couldn't run in the 5th Ward where they wanted to run as a Labor candidate. He'd have won, okay? And he had a card, and it said, we vote on Saturdays, as you all know. He said, don't go crabbing, vote for Babin, okay? And he lost because he was new in the ward. But anyhow, getting back to what you said, yeah, I stood with the trade, okay, and then
So Peter, it sounds like your dad was, and your mama was such great influences in your life. Did you have any other mentors early on in your life?
well, yes, because they had a monthly meeting. Central Trades and Labor Council had a monthly meeting, and my dad used to take me to it. I wasn't old enough. I had no office. I was just a member, but he used to take me to it. And it was on Iberville Street, right off of Charters, I believe. And the meeting, I think it was in Electrical Union Hall at that time. And then that's when I started meeting all the labor guys. And when it merged, the FLCIO merged, Pat Stoddard, who worked for the Times-Picayune as a telegraph. He used to cut all the lead, cut them out so they could run it on a press and all. And they had a union there at the Times-Picayune. That was the only typographical union, I think it was called. And then my dad was with the operating engineers, the building trades, and he got elected secretary-treasurer. So Pat was the president, my dad was the secretary-treasurer. Seafarers was very big in those days. And I started meeting all those guys, okay?
Who was the head of the Seafarers local?
Lindsey Williams. Lindsey Williams was and then Pat was the president of the FLCIO. My dad was the secretary-treasurer. And while I was working at the trade, Pat talked to my dad. He says, and Pat had no kids, okay? He married once, divorced. He married another lady, Miss Josephine, a wonderful woman. I never knew Pat's first wife. He says, Pete, he says, man, your son is, man, he's into it, okay? And I was young, man. Jesus, I was young. In my early 20s, He said, man, he's really into it. He says, I think I can get him an opportunity to go to work organizing if he wants to with the state county municipal employees, which are public, organizing engineers and equipment operators for the state of Louisiana, employees of the state. So my dad come to me, he says, I got this offer, would you like to take it? I said, yeah. I said, how much is it going to pay? I don't want to tell you, but there was nothing, only okay. And I was on a job, I was a steward on a job at Tenneco Oil Refinery. And I was the steward for the job. And it's called closing out when you finish the job, there's checkpoints, okay, and you close it out if you need to do something. It was just,
Now, the master mechanic on a job site for the operating engineers is like the head boss of all the crane operators on that site.
Right.
What is the steward's job on a site like that?
The steward's job responsibility is to police the collective bargaining agreement, the union contract, to make sure that the contractor that signed is living up to all the rules and regulations. Handle grievances, make sure that they're getting paid right, make sure that there's nobody taking their job. It's called jurisdictional job, and to be the guy that they go to for any kind of complaints.
So you're 22 years old on the Tenneco job site. Right. And you're the steward.
Right.
It's a pretty big position at that time.
Right. So I said, yeah. So the day that I had to leave was the last day for checkout. I'll never forget this. And we worked overtime, and I made about $80 that day, which was a ton of money, okay? And the job I took for organizing was $400 a month.
$400 a month. And this is about what time period, Pete?
Well, let's see. This was, it was before '68, because in '68, Pat again, said, I have an opportunity for you. And I was doing good, but not making no money. Traveling all over the state too, because highway had different districts, you know, like police, like the state police. And he said, I got an opportunity for you to go to work for the National AFL-CIO in Washington, but you'd be stationed here. You don't have to move to Washington. They created a new division called Manpower and Training. And I think I can get you on, because they asked me, they wanted someone from the city of New Orleans to be a representative, a field representative. And I said, okay. And I got the job. And then I went to $12,000 a year, which was big money. And I worked there until from 68 to 72. And that's when I went to work. The then manager of the operating engineers asked me to come to work for the local as his assistant. But the one thing he wanted me to do, because I was very familiar in manpower and training, that job consisted of, Roland, of going around and convincing the trade, what they called in those days, lily white trade unions, to integrate and have minorities participate in their apprenticeship and training programs. And that was my job, okay?
Were you successful with it?
Yeah, but believe it or not, it was touch and go with some locals. Matter of fact, one, I think it was sheet metal workers, if I'm not mistaken. It went on a court order because they refused to do it. And a federal judge, Christenberry, I think his name was, Judge Christenberry, took the hiring, what we call hiring hall procedure, out of the local, and he administered out of his court. And when an opening came up, one white, one black, one white, one black. They never had Latinos in those days. It was just black, okay? And then he got it to the point where it was supposed to be, because the program called for the opportunity to have the training programs numbers of minorities in relationship to the statistical metropolitan area, in relationship to the numbers of minorities living in the community versus whites, okay? It was called the Hometown Plan.
So that came out of the Johnson administration?
Yes, that was the new, what do you call it? I forgot the name.
Civil Rights Act?
No. It was a program he had.
New Frontier.
No, that was Kennedy. That's another story, but that goes back. No, the Great Society.
Okay.
The Great Society.
And when you left, and you said the manager of the local, the phraseology inside the operating engineers is a little bit different from some of the other unions.
All right.
The business manager, is that equivalent to the president in some
Right,
of the other locals?
right. That's what it is. The businessman, in the construction unions now, Roland, in the construction unions, the business manager is the top guy, okay? He is a parallel in what we call the industrial unions as the president.
Okay.
The president in like in my union and all of them, Local 406, all the trade unions, his duty is to be chair of the meetings. Basically, that's his duty. And maybe sign checks, and that kind of stuff. But basically, his duty is to chair the meeting.
So when you go on to become the assistant for the business manager for Local 406, this is in 1972, you said?
Yes.
And what were some of your duties at that time? What were you doing?
Well, the first thing he wanted me to do was to institute an apprenticeship to train program for the local union. We didn't have an apprenticeship to train program. All the other trades had one. We didn't have one. So I had that responsibility. And my dad was very instrumental in wanting to have it, but he gave that duty to me. So I did all the nuts and bolts that you had to do to get it charted with the international and put the program together and the nomenclature of how you operate an apprenticeship and training program. And we put it together successfully. We had it in the beginning, the first year we had, our Union Hall was built in '68 out on the Chef Highway, and we had a big piece of property in the back. And in the first year, that's where it was established. But
Well, tell me a little bit about that for a second. Did you have a Union Hall before '68?
oh yeah, it was on Rampart Street, off Rampart Street.
And why did y'all leave?
No, South Ramp. How would we leave it? It was an old building. In the bottom part, it was on 50 feet by 100 feet. That was the whole shebang. And the business agent and the secretary and the business manager used to park their car on an angle on 25 feet. The first part of the building was a rectangular building, straight up like this. The first part of the building on the bottom was the Union Hall, where you went for your meetings. That's where my dad got initiated. The lights came out the ceiling, and you turned them on with a little switch. It smoked in those days. They had little tin trays that was hooked to the back of the chairs, and that's how you smoked. And then, before you got initiated, you wasn't allowed in a meeting. You had to go outside. Well, your outside was an abandoned a toilet, okay? Outside commode, okay? But it was all, no more smell or nothing, but a little outhouse, that's what you call it. So you stood in there and they knocked on the door and they let you come in, and that's how you got initiated.
So who initiated the move to go out to Chef Highway?
My dad did. My dad was the principal on that, okay?
And the union that sits today on Chef Highway, that's the building that your dad envisioned.
Right. It's the headquarters building. We have an office at that time, we had an office in Baton Rouge. We had an office in Lafayette. We had an office satellite office in Alexandria. We had an office in Monroe. We had an office in Shreveport. And we had an office in Lake Charles. We later built a building for Baton Rouge and a building for Lake Charles. But the others, we never built a building. We rented a place.
So you become the assistant, you're running or getting the apprenticeship program up and running, and then what path does your career take at that point?
Well, I was also a business agent for the New Orleans district. So I was assistant to the business manager, but I was also a business agent in the New Orleans district. So I had the responsibility of servicing what we call servicing jobs. The big job that I had when I first got in there is when we built Marathon Oil Refinery from a sugarcane field. And I had over 200 operating engineers working on that job. And I was totally responsible for making sure that the people were hired out, and referred out, and policed the job, and took care of everything for the job, okay?
So tell me about some of the other political campaigns that you were getting involved in during that late 60s, early 70s period. Were there any, since the Union Hall was out in New Orleans East, were there any campaigns in the New Orleans East community that the union got involved with?
When I was still at LSU, I think Governor Cannon, I think, he was real anti-union guy. And we got involved actively in supporting Earl Long. And Bill Dodd was the lieutenant governor. Bill Dodd was part of a big labor law firm, Dodd, Hirschbach, and Mounier, okay? And I got involved in that election. Okay. Now this is before we talk going back a little bit. Okay. And then I got involved in an election with a congressman, big-time election in congressman, with out of Baton Rouge named Jimmy Morrison, who was running. Gillis Long was then the congressman, and that's when Kennedy was president. By the way, first president I could vote for, and I was 23 years old.
Because the vote at that time,
I was
you had to be
21. I missed it. I just missed it a little bit. But anyhow, so there was a guy running against him. His name was Rarick. Okay, he was a judge, originally from Missouri. I won't forget this one. Okay, and he was a Klansman. All right, and Gillis Long, Kennedy. Gillis Long was chairman of the Rules Committee in Congress, and they needed to expand the Rules Committee because they had Democrats who were segregation Democrats, what you call them, aristocrats or whatever the hell they call them, okay, who would never vote to expand the Rules Committee. And Jimmy Morrison was placed on that Rules Committee by Gillis Long, so they had enough votes to expand it to get the Kennedy's civil rights legislation out of the committee onto the floor. So we were supporting Jimmy Morrison. And that's when the Klan really got involved in it, okay? And I got caught in the switches on a couple of occasions where they spit on me and all that kind of stuff for handing leaflets out to union members. You called it the old Herman Highway. You used to run from Baton Rouge to Herman, where there were a lot of industrial complexes. And then we was in Bogalusa at the paper mill, and we was handing out leaflets there. And the Klan came there in their robes looking for us. So we got away. But it was touch and go, too. Matter of fact, the guy spit in my face really pissed me off, excuse my English. Okay, he spit in my face with tobacco chewer. And he called me a nigger lover, okay? And he came back around. I thought there was really going to be some static, so I had a teammate with me. I told him get in the car and start the motor because I don't know what's going to happen. And then he rolled the window down. It was getting cool. It was in November. He rolled the window down and he said, "Hey, nigger lover, give me some more of them leaflets." And he stuck his hand out. And when he did, I had the leaflets here. When he stuck his hand out, I grabbed him by the shirt and I pulled his head out the window and I punched him right in his mouth, okay? And he still had tobacco juice in him. It came out all over the place. I threw the whole leaflets to the car and I ran like hell to the other car. We got the hell out of town. But anyhow, that's the experience. But yeah, so we started getting involved. And then we started getting involved in the judge races, and your stepfather got elected to the council, Fred Casbrick. But that was before we talking now, you know.
It's all these races I know kind of melt together at times. What about any of the local state rep races? Do you recall? Do any stand out in your mind?
I really got involved in that when I was married. We moved out to New Orleans East, my wife and I, because she lived out there. And we was living in a little shotgun house, actually a Camelback on Orleans Avenue. And my dad and I bought a whole block of land. It was in the woods for $10,000 or $12,000. No sewer, no nothing, okay? And we got our machines out there and we cleared the place up and made it nice. And then we decided to build a house there and petition the city, and they came out with gravel road and all that kind of stuff. And that's when I started getting involved in politics big time. I was working for the local end, okay? And young guy who went to school with me, but before me, named Nat Kiefer. And he put together a political organization. It was called Nova New Orleans East Voters something election. He wanted me to join. I said, I can't join that. I said, I'll support you, but I can't join. I said, I belong to the AFL-CIO. We got our own political organization. I said, but I'll move to help you out. And well, I'm ahead of myself. Nat worked as a Teamster during the summer. He became a lawyer. He was a lawyer then, young lawyer. And he was with the Teamsters Union. And my dad and the Teamster president were real close friends.
Now, who was the Teamster president at that time?
Chuck Winters. He was sent down from Chicago because the Teamsters local was kind of messing around there, okay, in those days. And so he asked my dad, he said, we need $300. You think you can raise it to put a mailing out? And my dad turned and says, you know Keith? I said, yeah, Daddy, I know him. He went to school with me. I said, he's behind me. I said, and he's a good football player. He played football for Tulane, and he's a lawyer now. He said, what you think? I said, I think it's fine. Let's go with it. And so that's how we got in the local races there, okay, in New Orleans East. And then that's when Soul started with Don Hubbard and Sherman Copeland and Israel Augustine and a few others. And then I felt right in on it, okay?
So, from 72, did you rise any higher than business agent with the operating engineers?
Jack got cancer, okay? The business
Jack
manager,
Fisk was
the statewide business manager. He got cancer, and that was in '76, and he knew he was going to die. Okay, he had it bad. They were feeding with a tube in his stomach. You know, that's how he fed. Anyhow, he had it bad, and he talked to my dad, and he said, I'd like to support your son to take my place. So my dad talked to me. He said, now I'm gonna tell you, excuse me, it's a hell of a job, okay? You gotta go around the state, got a lot of problems, ba, 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 ba. He says, what you think? I said, I'm ready to handle it. You think I am? He said, yeah. So I took the job. Okay,
So
it was in between elections where the executive board could appoint you. Okay, then I had a run in '78 for the first time, and I had opposition. And I had opposition because I was young.
How old were you?
Oh, 76, Roland. I was in my 30s, late 30s, I guess. 76, 36, 46, 56, 76.
Mm-hmm.
Right close to 40, okay, 39 or something like that.
And then you won the election in '78.
I won it. And then 3 years later, I had another one, and I won it. And then the next one I had, I beat the hell out the guy. I won good, but the last one, I beat the hell out of him. I think I got 3,000 something votes, and he got like 200 and something. And from then on, I didn't have any more elections. I didn't have no opposition.
And while you were with the local, you went on, and you became an officer with the International Union as well, right?
The International has a structure of international trustees and also vice presidents. There was 10 of them at the time. The international trustee was a fellow from Tiny Tim, we called him, from Texas, Houston, Texas. And I became active because in our structure we have conferences. There's 5 conferences nationwide in Canada. Northeast Conference, North Central States Conference, Canadian Conference, Western Conference, South Atlantic Conference. And I became active going around in those conferences because we had a lot of work. Some years we didn't, you know, but it still was a big thing. And I made interchanges with local unions. And the young president, well, he was assistant to the president for years, and he had a lot of activities in Louisiana with building all those industrial plants with jurisdictional disputes and that kind of stuff. You got to be real good friends with my dad. His name was Frank Hanley. And I got to be friends with Frank Hanley. And he became president. And when he did, the fellow from Texas retired, and he said, I would like to nominate you to the executive board, the national, all the vice presidents, they got to put the stamp on it, okay, for you to become international trustee. Oh, I said, Jesus, that's an honor. And I was young then too, okay? I got appointed as an international trustee. And then you got to run at conventions and you get elected. But that's nothing compared to local union elections, okay? And then there was this fella from Ohio. And I served as an international trustee, I guess, for 4 or 5 years. And then there was this guy from Ohio who died suddenly. And Hanley says, I want to put you on as a vice president. Well, that was like the crown jewel, okay, of reaching your pinnacle, because the next step is president, okay, although it was 10 of us. And I said, Jesus, don't do that to me. You're scaring the hell out of me. Okay. And he called me to Washington. And he says, I talked to all the vice presidents, and they're going to go along with it. He says, and I'm going to announce that you're going to be our next international vice president. And I served there for 20 years.
20 years.
20 years. Well, I was the kid on the block, man. I mean, all those guys were much older than me. And I was the kid on the block, okay?
Peter, what year did you retire as business manager from operating engineers?
2005. I made a pledge to the membership that if I run for office, I would continue the term. And my term came up in the term I would have to run back for office, where I'd have to run back for office. I guess that was in '04, something like that. And which meant I would go into, I was 69 then, which means I'd go in my 70s. And I talked to my wife, and she said, you can't retire, you wouldn't know what to do. And she really was not too keen on me retiring because she knew how dedicated I was. She thought I would get upset and be ornery and all kind of other stuff. I said, no, I'm ready. I said, I'm ready. I said, I made this pledge and I'm going to keep it. But I got tired of traveling, Roland. I mean, I had statewide operations. We was in planes all the time with international vice presidents going all over the place, handling all kind of problems and everything else. So I just said, I'm ready, and I did.
During your career, what was the high point that you felt labor was able to accomplish, or you were able to accomplish within the labor movement?
It's a hard question because, unfortunately, when I took over business manager in '76 is when right to work came in. So I had to live under those perils, and it wasn't fun. But we did have an election. Maybe that was 70. No, right to work. Yeah, right to work came in '76. We did have an election, and it was with Edwin Edwards. And you said the parable. This was a disappointing parable, okay, if I could use that term. And we had a young guy, Edwards, and he had won the first time. So it was 70. No, it was. No, I'm ahead of myself. He was governor. He was governor in '76. Okay. So this is the disappointing part. because I was there in '72. We had this election, and we used to put out a questionnaire to all the candidates. Are you for this, for this? Would you vote for right to work? Okay. And that kind of stuff. And we had it, no, Roland, I'm getting confused, 76. Anyhow, I'm getting confused. It's going back too far.
I think July of '76 is when right to work
Right.
passed the
Well,
second time.
well, before that, okay. We had these things. And we thought that we had it made. And Edwin asked the president, if the legislature signs it, would you vote it in? Would you sign it? And he said, yeah, but he was under the strict confidentiality that would never happen. Okay, and it happened, and that's when it came in. So that was my biggest disappointment, and we fought that, and it's still in today. I guess the pinnacle. Pinnacle of what we accomplished. One of the things I think we accomplished that was extremely important is that even though a lot of unions got decimated by right to work, although we lost members, we never did lose our identity as a statewide organization. And we never took a back seat to anyone, okay? And I think that because of that, as a statewide organization, we had to respect, as a local union, more than any other local union. Not taking anything away from other local unions, but you have to understand they were geographically located. So where they might have had 3 or 4 electrical unions or carpenters unions or plumbers unions, they had 3 or 4 heads. With operating engineers, they just had 1 union and 1 head. And we were recognized for that. They came to us, let's put it that way.
Okay, I think this is a good breaking point.
Okay,
for us,
great.
Pete.
All right.
Thank you so much for
my
your
pleasure.
time.
My pleasure.
All right.